After studying this module, you should be able to understand the division of the nervous system, describe about the basic building blocks of nervous system, the neuron, outline the development of the central nervous system with its focus on the brain, explain the appearance of the brain and identify the terms used to indicate directions and planes of section, describe the major structures of the forebrain and describe the major structures of the midbrain, the hindbrain and the spinal cord. The brain is a complex, versatile and flexible network that controls our behaviors and mental processes. The biological events are related to the human behavior and experiences by studying the activity in the nervous system. The nervous system comprises the central nervous system consisting of the brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system consisting of the cranial, spinal and peripheral nerves. Our discussion will focus on the brain with particular attention to its structures and processes which bear its effect on cognitive models. To understand how the brain controls our experiences and behavior, we must first understand how its individual cells function.
So this section will deal about the understanding of the nervous system and neurons. The nervous system is composed of fibers and nerve tissues which in turn are made up of cells called neurons. There are billions of neurons in the nervous system connected with each other and therefore forming a complex network out of it. They trigger all the activity of the nervous system to further form a communication network. This communication network helps in coordinating all the other systems of the body and enables them to function further. Therefore, they are the basic building blocks of the nervous system. Now, let us understand that each neuron has three main parts, and let's consider all these parts. First is the cell body, second dendrites, and the third is the axion. The cell body, which is also called the soma, contains the biochemical substances needed to keep all the neurons alive. So, this is basically a kind of a pill which will help the neuron to stay alive. The nucleus further carries the genetic information that determines how the cell develops and functions. In the cell body, the nutrients and waste products are filtered in and out through the preamble cell wall. Next is the dendrites. Dendrites emerge from the cell body as branch-like fibers. It refers from a very Greek word meaning tree. Dendrites gather neural impulses from other neurons and send them on to the cell body. There, the incoming information is processed and combined together. Axion, a long tubular transmitting pathway in which signals from the cell body are passed along to other cells by means of junctures known as synapses. The axion branches out at its end to form a number of axion terminals, as many as several hundreds of them in the same area. So, it basically a pathway which is connected to or which connects all the neurons together. Large axions are surrounded by fatty substances called the myelin sheath, which acts as a type of insulation to the neuron. These sheaths are made up of glial cells. Neurons are supported to their functions by glial cells, meaning glue. Glial cells do not receive or send nerve impulses, but they surround neurons and hold them together in the place. They also manufacture nutrients and chemicals that neurons need. So, they hold each and every neuron glued together so that the information from one neuron can be transmitted to the other neuron. It helps in providing nutrients, which further helps in the growth, and the chemicals which are not passed to the far off neuron can be transmitted through these glial cells. Now, when we have covered what neurons and nervous system is all about, let us understand how these neurons communicate information from one neuron to the other neuron. Nervous system is a giant communication network, and its actions requires the transmission of nerve impulses from one neuron to the another. Researchers have discovered that the synaptic space, a tiny gap between the axon terminal and the next neuron passes electricity directly from one neuron to the other neuron. One of the functions of neuron is to generate electricity. Another function is to produce neurotransmitter, which is the chemical substance that carry messages across the synaptic space to the other neuron, other neurons, muscles or glands. This chemical communication process involves 5 steps which will help us in understanding how these neurons transmit information or how these neurons communicate information from one neuron to the other neuron. First it would be namely synthesis, storage, release, building and deactivation. So what is synthesis? In the synaptic stage, the transmitter molecules are formed inside the neuron. The molecules are then used in the synaptic vessel chambers within the axon terminals. When an action potential comes down the axon, the vesicles move to the surface of the axon terminal and the molecules are released into the fluid filled space between the axon and the presynaptic, sending the neurons and the members of the postsynaptic, which is the receiving neuron. The molecules cross the synaptic space and bind themselves to the receptor sites, which are the large protein molecules embedded in the receiving neuron cell membranes. Deactivation or breakdown of neurons can take place out there. Some transmitter molecules are deactivated by other chemicals located in the synaptic space, and that breaks them down into chemical components. In other instances, deactivation mechanism is broken down, in which the transmitter molecules are taken into presynaptic axon terminals. You can understand this with the help of figures also, which will help you in understanding about the transmission happening between the neurons. Now let's understand what is central nervous system. Central nervous system, also termed as CNS, consists of the spinal cord and the brain. Our discussion focuses on the brain out here, with particular emphasis on its structures and functions. Brain. It is the most complex structure of the known universe, which contains 3 pounds of protein, fat and fluids. Brain help us in our basic physiological functions such as breathing and heart rate. The crowning feature of brain development is the cerebral cortex, thus which makes us a unique human being. For example, the biological seat of Einstein, scientific genius, Mother Teresa's compassion, etc. The major structure of the brain with its function will be explained in this module. There would be 3, brain has traditionally been viewed as having 3 major subdivisions: the hindbrain, midbrain and the forebrain. The hindbrain, it is located at the lowest level and it's also the most primitive level of the brain. In the brain, the spinal cord enters and enlarges to form the structure and that compose the stalk-like brain stem. The cerebellum is the other major portion of the hindbrain, which is attached to the brain stem. The brain stem, when we are using this word brain stem, let's understand what brain stem is all about. It is called the life support system. The structure of the brain stem consists of pons and medulla. They support the vital life functions. Medulla is the first structure above the spinal cord and is 1.5 inch long. The medulla is well developed at the time of birth and plays an important function such as heart rate and respiration. The presence of medulla makes these functions occur automatically. If medulla is damaged due to some reason, maybe because of too much alcohol consumption, or it can lead to the death of a person or serious consequence like maintain on life support system. Medulla acts as a two-way thoroughfare for all the sensory and motor nerve tracts. These come from the spinal cord and move down to the brain, crossing the medulla. Therefore, the left side of the brain receives sensory information or sensory input from and exerts motor control over the right side of the body. The vice versa occurs when right side of the brain receives the left side of the body. The pons in the Latin means a bridge, lies just above the medulla and carries nerve impulses between higher and lower levels of the nervous system. Pons include multiple neurons which helps in regulating sleep and also controls vital functions like medulla, respirations. The cerebrum, also called as the motor coordination. Cerebellum is often also referred to as a little brain, which is attached to the back of the brain stem. It looks like a miniature brain, and its cortex is a covering consists of grey cells, bodies of grey matter. The primary function of cerebellum is to maintain the muscular movements coordination. Another function of cerebellum is in learning and memory. When it's referred to that cerebellum control the muscular motivation, muscular movements, it also includes the timing with which they have to react to events. It further helps to regulate the complex and rapidly changing movements that basically require precise timing. To further understand this thing, let's take an example. When you're driving a car and take a stern turn to avoid collision to another car or even a ballet dancer or anything, this is the role of what body movements can control motor coordination, and this is what cerebellum is controlling out here. These movements are controlled by cerebellum and can easily be disrupted by consumption of alcohol, producing the coordination of difficulties. Obviously, when there is a higher stage of alcohol consumption, motor body coordination is not there, and you would be fumbling with so many things while you have consumed alcohol. Your body is not static, the walk is not proper, you would be following from one place to another. The midbrain, it is located just above the hindbrain. The midbrain contains clusters of sensory and motor neurons. If we focus on the sensory portion of the midbrain, it contains all the visual and the auditory systems, which helps us in relay of these centers. Here the nerve impulses from the eyes and ears are organized and sent to forebrain structures involved in visual and auditory perception. The midbrain also control motor neurons and control eye movements. The reticular formation, the brain's gatekeeper. As defined by Passer and Smith, reticular formation acts as a kind of a sentry, both altering higher centers of the brain that messages are coming and then either blocking those messages or allowing them to go forward. It helps in sending input to higher regions of the brain to alter them and also include the descending procedure where input passes from the brain and block out the sensory information. Reticular formation is a pencil shaped structure forming the core of the brain stem and extends itself from the hindbrain up into the lower portion of the forebrain. The reticular formation arouses the cortex to keep the brain alert and attentive to new stimulation. Therefore, to summarize the above explained text, reticular formation is a part of the brain that keeps you alert, helps you pay attention to new information, connected to the connected to the hypothalamus, and the reticular formation is a group of nerve fibers located inside the brain stem, and it is absolutely very essential for our life as it plays a very central role in the consciousness and sleep and attention of a person. Let's come to forebrain. Forebrain is considered to be the brain's highest region with most advanced portion from an evolutionary standpoint. This region is specifically involved in processing of complex information because of this reason only that it differentiates us humans from the rest of the animal kingdom. Forebrain is composed of the following: limbic system, which consists of two structures. Within it are hippocampus and the amygdala, thalamus, which is referred as brain sensory switchboard. Third is the hypothalamus, which regulates basic biological needs, and fourth is the cerebral cortex. The cortex is referred as the outer portion of the forebrain, which is like thin covering. Before discussing these three major structures, let us understand what a cerebrum would be, as this word will appear in the following topics. Cerebellum consists of two large hemispheres, a left hemisphere, left side, and the right side, each wrapping around the brain in a manner to cut it into two halves. These are important differences. There are important differences which exist between the psychological functioning of the two hemispheres. Here let us start. You can also you can do an activity where you can take a picture of a brain and you can label them with its parts and which will help you in understanding its specific functions. Let's take them one by one. First is the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is located above the midbrain, which is just top of the brain stem. The basic function of hypothalamus is to organize inputs from sensory organs and then routes them to the appropriate areas of the brain. It sorts and relays incoming information to the different parts of the forebrain. For example, information coming from the cerebellum is oftentimes relayed to the motor cortex to the cerebral cortex. The thalamus also works with the reticular formation on regulating states of sleep and wakefulness. If there is a disruption in the thalamus, then it may lead to higher confusing experiences, as the thalamus may have been sending sensory information to the higher regions of the brain. This was specifically seen in patients who have schizophrenia when their brain images were consulted. Hypothalamus is located just below the thalamus, just above the brain stem. It contains many small nuclei with variety of functions. The most important function of hypothalamus is to connect the endocrine system via the pituitary gland. Pituitary gland are basically which controls the other glands of the endocrine gland and is also termed as the master gland. Hypothalamus controls many aspects of motivations and emotions, including sexual behavior, temperature, regulating sleep, eating, drinking and aggression. Damage to hypothalamus can lead to major disruption in these functions. For example, destruction in one area of the male's hypothalamus can result in the complete loss of sex drive, and damage to another portion will produce an overwhelming urge to eat that result in extreme obesity. The limbic system. Limbic system is made up of amygdala and the hippocampus, from a Latin word meaning almond. Owing to its shape, the amygdala is responsible for processing emotions, how humans become aware of them and how we experience them. It is also critical for our survival because it helps us to determine one object from another. For instance, damage to the amygdala may cause the humans to eat our own feces, feed the wrong enemy, or to try to mate with the chair. The hippocampus, on the other hand, is presumably involved in memory storage because damage to the part actually results in inability to store new information. So we have come to know that hippocampus basically, for example, if you are fighting with if you have a fight with somebody, you might fight with some wrong person, maybe with your own friend only. So you cannot differentiate between whether this is my enemy or he or she is my friend. Overall, the limbic system is involved in memories and emotions by determining which connection should be strengthened and which should be rewired. Cerebral cortex. It is the most recently developed part of the brain. Like a crumpled paper, it almost completely caps the rest of the brain parts. It is also the largest part of the human brain, making up to 80% of the brain's volume. High level processing also takes place in this part of the brain. It has been seen that fish and amphibians have no cerebral cortex. Cerebral cortex is not essential for physical survival, but it is essential for human functioning. Because of the complexity and the influences of cerebral cortex in various behaviors and mental processes, this part of the brain deserves to be treated more in depth as we have taken the earlier concepts. The cerebral cortex is divided into two hemispheres, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. Left hemisphere is associated with verbal reasoning such as speech and grammar and mathematics, while the right hemisphere is involved in non-verbal processing such as your spatial perception, visual recognitions and emotions. The left hemisphere processes information coming from the right side of the body, while the right hemisphere processes information coming from the left side of your body. The two hemispheres of the brain are connected with each other by a bundle of axons called the corpus callosum. This connection allows the left and the right side of the hemisphere to communicate and integrate information with each other. Two notable areas in the left hemisphere are the Broca's and the Wernicke's area. The Broca's area was discovered in 1861 by a French surgeon named Paul Broca. When he evaluated a man called Tan, Tan was named so because Tan was the only word he could speak. His condition is known as the aphasia. Tan's autopsy revealed that his brain was damaged in a certain area in the left hemisphere. Broca's area turned are to be involved in speech production, while Wernicke's area is significant for language comprehension. Aside from being divided into two hemispheres, the cerebral cortex is divided into lobes also, that is the occipital lobe, temporal lobe, parietal, frontal lobes. So let's understand them, each one of them in this section. The occipital lobe is located at the back of the head, as is involved in processing visual information such as color, shape and motion. Accordingly, the visual cortex and the visual association cortex are located in this lobe. Damage to the occipital lobe may cause cross-eyeing and blindness partly or entirely of the visual field. Sometimes you can understand this with an example. Oftentimes born with defective visual cortex, so that we have to consciously cross the eyes just to see straight, which is of certain cats. Temporal lobe is located just above the ears and is involved in hearing, language, processing and memory. The auditory cortex, auditory association cortex and part of the visual association cortex are located in this lobe. Damage to the temporal lobe leads to failure to store new information, just like damage to the hippocampus, which were discussed above. The parietal lobe is located at the top of the head and towards the rear. It is involved in attention and motor control, in processing spatial locations and in perceiving pain, touch and temperature. It is said that Albert Einstein's parietal lobe is 15% larger than average, probably the reason why we oftentimes imagine objects in space while formulating his theories. The sensory association cortex is located in this lobe also. The frontal lobe is located just behind the forehead and towards the top of the head. It constitutes 30% of the cerebral cortex, in humans 70% in chimps and 3.5% in cats, and it barely exists in rats. It is involved in the control of voluntary muscles, intelligence and personality. Its critical involvement with personality comes from the story of Gage, who was of a 25-year-old foreman whose personality was altered after an iron rod accidentally shot him and pierced his frontal lobe. From being mild-mannered, hard-working and emotionally calm, he became very moody, irresponsible and selfish. The most important portion of the frontal lobe is the prefrontal cortex. It is sometimes referred to as the executive control system of the body, and it is involved in planning, reasoning, monitoring and organizing and even thinking. Damage to the frontal lobe causes failure to follow basic directions, distractions from irrelevant stimuli and personality change. The somatosensory cortex and motor cortex are also located in this lobe. So let's try and summarize what we have done in this module. Neural bases. Each neuron has dendrites which receive nerve impulses from other neurons, a cell body which contains the vital processes of the cell, and the axon which conducts nerve impulses to adjacent neurons, muscles and glands. Nervous system consists of nerve fibers which further include cells, and these are termed as neurons. Neuron consists of cell body, dendrites and an axon. Passage of the impulses across the synapse is mediated by chemical structures or transmitters. Neurons are selective in the neurotransmitters that can stimulate them. Some neurotransmitters excite neurons, whereas others inhibit firing of the postsynaptic neuron. The human brain consists of the hindbrain, the midbrain and the forebrain, an organization that reflects the evolution of increasingly more complex brain structures related to behavioral components. Major structures within the hindbrain include the medulla, which monitors and controls vital body functions, the pons, which contains important groups of sensory and motor neurons, and the cerebellum, which is concerned with motor coordination. We had also discussed about the midbrain. Midbrain contains important sensory and motor neurons, as well as many sensory and motor tracts connecting higher and lower parts of the brain of the nervous system. The reticular formation plays a very vital role in consciousness, attention and sleep. Activity of the ascending reticular formation excites higher areas of the brain and prepares them to respond to stimulation. The descending reticular formation acts as gate, determining which stimuli get through to it and enters into your conscious level. The forebrain consists of two cerebral hemispheres and a number of subcortical structures. The cerebral hemispheres are connected by the corpus callosum. The thalamus acts as a switchboard through which impulses originating in sense organs are routed to the appropriate sensory projection area. The hypothalamus plays a major important role in many aspects of motivation and emotional behaviors. The limbic system seems to be involved in organizing the behaviors involved in motivation and emotion. Last but not the least, the cerebral cortex is divided into frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal lobes. Some of the areas of the cerebral cortex receive sensory input, some control motor functions, and others are involved in higher mental processes in humans. The frontal lobes are particularly important in such executive functions.